I watched in disbelief as Sheriff Karen sat at my kitchen table, inside my own boathouse, signing official documents like she owned the place. The woman who was supposed to protect and serve had just served me an eviction notice for my own property. Her smug smile widened as she looked up at me through the window I had installed with my own hands. "You have 24 hours to remove your belongings from my boathouse," she said, her badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. That was when I realized, sometimes justice requires creativity. My name is David, and for 15 years I called the shores of Pine Lake my sanctuary. Every morning, I would wake up to the sound of water lapping against the dock I built myself, and every evening I would sit in my boathouse watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The boathouse was not just storage for my fishing gear and old aluminum boat. It was my retreat from the world. When work stress got too heavy, or when the noise of town politics became too much, I would grab a beer and sit on the small porch I had added to the structure. The building sat on sturdy posts driven deep into the lake bed, connected to shore by a wooden walkway that creaked pleasantly under my feet. I had built most of it myself over the years, adding improvements and personal touches that made it uniquely mine. Solar panels powered a small refrigerator and LED lights. I had installed windows that opened to catch the lake breeze, and shelves lined with books and fishing magazines. It was my personal slice of heaven, 40 feet from shore, and surrounded by water that reflected the sky like a mirror. Sheriff Karen Martinez had been patrolling our area for about 2 years. At first, she seemed professional enough. She would wave from her patrol car when she drove past my property, and occasionally stop to chat about lake safety or remind me about fishing license renewals. But over time, I began to notice something different about her interactions. She started asking questions about my property boundaries. Where exactly did my land end and the public access begin? How deep did my ownership extend into the water? Did I have permits for all the improvements I had made to the boathouse? Her questions felt less like friendly conversation and more like an interrogation. "You have a beautiful setup here," she said one evening as she stood on my dock, her hands on her hips in that authoritative pose cops seem to practice. "Must be nice to have your own private retreat." I nodded, unsure where the conversation was headed. It took me years to get it just right. Every board, every nail. I put it all in myself. She walked around the boathouse slowly, examining the structure like an appraiser evaluating property. "You know, David, there are regulations about structures built over public waterways. The county has been cracking down on unpermitted additions lately." My stomach tightened. "I have all my permits. Everything was approved and inspected." "I am sure it was," she replied, but her tone suggested otherwise. "Still, regulations change. What was legal 15 years ago might not meet current standards." That conversation haunted me for weeks. I pulled out all my old paperwork, double-checking every permit and approval. Everything was in order, but Karen's words had planted a seed of doubt that grew stronger each time I saw her patrol car slow down as it passed my property. I should have recognized the warning signs. The way she lingered during her visits, studying my boathouse like she was memorizing every detail. The questions about my work schedule and how often I used the structure. The casual comments about waterfront property values and how lucky I was to have such privacy. But I was naive. I thought she was just making conversation, maybe even showing friendly interest in my little piece of paradise. I had no idea that Sheriff Karen was already planning to make my sanctuary her own. 3 weeks later, I discovered that my world had been turned upside down. It was a Tuesday morning, and I walked down to the boathouse with my coffee and fishing rod, ready to start the day with some peaceful time on the water. But when I reached for the door handle, something was wrong. The lock had been changed. I stood there staring at the shiny new deadbolt, my coffee growing cold in my hand. This was my boathouse on my property, secured with a lock I had installed myself. Yet somehow, I could not get inside my own building. Looking for something, the voice behind me made me jump. I turned to find Sheriff Corinne walking down my dock, her uniform crisp and her badge catching the morning light. She carried a set of keys that jingled with each step. "Corinne, what is going on? Someone changed the lock on my boathouse." She smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it. "I changed the lock, David, for security purposes." "Security purposes? This is my property." "Actually," she said, pulling a folded document from her shirt pocket, "that is where you are wrong. According to county records, this boathouse sits on public waterway property. The structure itself may be yours, but the foundation extends into public waters." I felt my blood pressure rising. "That is ridiculous. I have permits for everything. This boathouse has been here for 15 years. "Permits can be revoked," she replied calmly, "especially when structures are found to be in violation of current waterway regulations. I have been working with the county assessor to review all lakefront properties." She unlocked the door and stepped inside like she owned the place. I followed, my anger building with each step. Inside, I found clothes hanging in the corner where I used to store my fishing gear. A small television sat on the shelf where my books used to be. The refrigerator was stocked with her food. "You moved into my boathouse." "I am using it as a temporary field office," she said, settling into the chair I had built from reclaimed wood. "The county has authorized me to maintain a presence on the lake for safety and regulatory compliance." I stared at her in disbelief. "You cannot just take over someone else's property." "I am not taking over anything. I am utilizing public resources for public safety." She opened a file folder and began reading, dismissing me like I was a nuisance. "If you have concerns about the arrangement, you can file a complaint with the county commissioners." "I will do exactly that." "Good luck," she said without looking up. "I have already spoken with Commissioner Walsh about the situation. He is very supportive of my waterway safety initiative." I left the boathouse feeling like I had been punched in the gut. This was not just theft. It was abuse of power on a level I had never experienced. Corinne was using her badge and her connections to steal my property, and she was doing it with complete confidence that no one would stop her. That evening, I called the county commissioner's office. The secretary informed me that any complaints about waterway enforcement should be directed to the sheriff's department. When I explained that my complaint was about the sheriff herself, she suggested I contact the state attorney general's office. I spent the next week making phone calls, sending emails, and filling out forms. Every door I tried to open led to another bureaucratic dead end. Corinne had done her homework, surrounding herself with legal cover and friendly officials who saw no problem with her waterway safety initiative. Meanwhile, she was settling into my boathouse like she planned to stay forever. Over the following weeks, Corinne's occupation of my boathouse evolved from a simple theft into a full-scale abuse of power that left me feeling helpless and angry. She began using my personal retreat as her unofficial headquarters, conducting official business from the space I had built with my own hands. I watched from my kitchen window as deputies arrived for meetings, their patrol cars parked along my shoreline like I was running some kind of police station. Corinne would sit in my chair, at my table, using my electricity while she briefed officers on lake patrol duties and waterway regulations. This is a perfect location for monitoring lake activities, I heard her tell Deputy Rodriguez one afternoon. We can see the entire North Shore from here, and the radio reception is excellent. She had installed a police radio and mounted it on the wall where my fishing calendar used to hang. Official paperwork covered the surface where I used to tie flies and organize tackle boxes. My personal sanctuary had become a command center for her expanded authority. The worst part was how she treated me when I approached my own property. If I walked down to check my dock or retrieve something from my boat, she would emerge from the boathouse like a security guard. "Can I help you with something, David?" she would ask, her hand resting on her service weapon. "I just need to get my boat keys." "Your boat keys are stored in a county-controlled structure. You will need to submit a request for access to personal property." She actually made me fill out a form to access my own belongings. The humiliation was calculated and complete. I was being treated like a criminal on my own property, while she acted like the rightful owner. But Karen was not finished. 2 weeks after her initial takeover, she presented me with a bill. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the official-looking document. "Usage fees," she explained matter-of-factly. "You have been accessing county-controlled dock facilities without proper permits. The fee structure is clearly outlined in the new waterway regulations." I read the charges in disbelief. Dock access fee, $50 per month. Boat launch fee, $25 per use. Property maintenance fee, $100 per month. She was charging me to use my own dock. "This is insane. You cannot charge me fees for my own property." "I am not charging you for your property. I am charging you for access to county-controlled waterway facilities." She smiled that same cold smile. "If you prefer, you can anchor your boat elsewhere." That night I discovered the full scope of her plan. Hidden in the county records, I found a document that made my blood run cold. A notice of intent to claim adverse possession. Karen was not just stealing my boathouse. She was planning to claim ownership of my entire waterfront property. According to the filing, her continuous and open occupation of the waterway structure, combined with her improvements and maintenance of the facility, established her legal claim to the property. If I did not challenge the claim within 90 days, she could potentially gain legal ownership of my shoreline. I called my neighbor, Bill Thompson, who had been watching the situation unfold with growing concern. "She is trying to steal your land," he said after I showed him the document. "This is not law enforcement. This is theft with a badge." "What can I do? Every time I try to file a complaint, I get the runaround." "Have you talked to a lawyer?" I had thought about it, but good lawyers were expensive, and I was not sure I could afford a long legal battle against someone with the resources of the county behind her. "I am not sure I have the money for that kind of fight." "Then you better find another way," Bill said grimly. "Because if you do not stop her soon, she is going to own your whole waterfront." That night, I sat in my living room staring out at my boathouse, watching the lights Karen had installed blazing across the water. She was in there right now, probably planning her next move, confident that I was too intimidated to fight back. She was wrong. I was not intimidated anymore. I was furious, and I was starting to realize that sometimes the system fails to protect people from those who abuse their power. When the law becomes a weapon in the wrong hands, citizens have to find other ways to defend themselves. I just had to figure out how. The moment that changed everything happened on a Saturday afternoon in late August. I was sitting on my back porch, trying to enjoy a quiet weekend, when I heard the sound of laughter and music coming from the direction of my boathouse. At first, I thought Karen was having another one of her official meetings, but as the sounds grew louder, I realized this was something different. I walked down to investigate and found a scene that made my blood boil. Karen was hosting a barbecue party at my boathouse. Not just any party, but a gathering of local officials, county commissioners, and their families. Children were running around on my dock while adults sat in lawn chairs, eating grilled food and drinking beer. Karen stood at the center of it all, playing host like she owned the place. "David," she called out when she saw me approaching. "Perfect timing. I was just telling everyone about the new waterway management program." I stared at the scene in disbelief. These people were treating my property like a public park, using my dock as their personal party venue, while I was not even allowed to access my own boathouse without filling out forms. "This is my property," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Actually," Commissioner Walsh interjected, wiping barbecue sauce from his fingers, "Sheriff Martinez has been explaining the legal situation. This is a county-controlled facility now, and we are here for an official inspection of the waterway management program. An inspection that includes beer and hot dogs." Karen stepped forward, her smile sharp as a knife. "David, you seem upset. Maybe you should go back to your house and let the adults handle county business." The dismissive tone in her voice, the way she spoke to me like I was a child throwing a tantrum, pushed me over the edge. But before I could respond, she pulled out an envelope and handed it to me. "Actually, this is perfect timing. I have something for you." Inside the envelope was an eviction notice, not just for the boathouse, but for my entire waterfront property. According to the document, my land was being claimed by the county under eminent domain for public safety and waterway management purposes. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises," Karen announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The county will provide fair market compensation, of course." The party guests had gone quiet, watching the drama unfold like it was dinner theater. I looked around at their faces, searching for some sign of sympathy or outrage, but found only uncomfortable silence. These people knew what Karen was doing, and they were letting it happen. "This is theft," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is progress," Karen replied. "The county needs this waterfront access for public safety. Your personal convenience is not more important than community welfare." I stood there holding the eviction notice, surrounded by people who were literally partying on my stolen property, and realized that I was completely alone. The system I had trusted to protect me was the same system that was stealing from me. The officials I had called for help were the same officials enjoying barbecue at my expense. That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at the eviction notice, listening to the sounds of laughter and music still echoing across the water. Karen had won, and she was celebrating her victory with the very people who should have been stopping her. But as I sat there in the darkness, a different kind of anger began to replace my despair. Not the hot, explosive anger that makes people do stupid things, but the cold, calculating anger that makes people do clever things. I thought about my background in marine engineering, about the systems I had designed and built over the years. I thought about the boathouse I had constructed with my own hands, and all the little details that only I knew about its construction. If Karen wanted to steal my sanctuary, she was welcome to it, but she might not enjoy it as much as she expected. The idea came to me in the middle of the night, 3 days after Karen's barbecue party. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, when I remembered something important about my boathouse construction that Karen could not possibly know. When I built the structure 15 years ago, I had designed it to be more versatile than a typical lakeside building. My background in marine engineering had taught me to think about water levels, seasonal flooding, and the long-term effects of weather on waterfront structures. So I had installed a flotation system. The boathouse was not just sitting on posts driven into the lake bed. It was built on a platform that could be detached from its foundation and converted into a floating structure. I had designed it as a precaution against severe flooding, but I had never needed to use the system. Until now. The flotation chambers were hidden beneath the floor, accessible through panels that looked like ordinary storage compartments. The release mechanisms were concealed behind what appeared to be decorative trim work. To anyone who did not know the secret, the boathouse looked like a permanently fixed structure. But with the right knowledge and tools, it could be transformed into a floating building in less than an hour. Corinne had no idea she was squatting in a boat. I spent the next week planning every detail of my operation. I had to be careful. If I was going to do this, I needed to make sure I stayed within the boundaries of the law. Technically, Corinne had claimed the boathouse through questionable legal maneuvers, but the building itself was still my property. I had every right to relocate my own structure. The timing had to be perfect. Corinne typically left the boathouse around 6 in the evening and returned the next morning. That gave me a window of opportunity, but I would need help to execute the plan quickly and quietly. I approached my neighbor, Bill Thompson, who had been watching Corinne's power grab with growing disgust. "You want to do what?" he asked when I explained my plan. "I want to float my boathouse to the middle of the lake," I repeated. "It is my building, and I have the right to relocate it." Bill stared at me for a long moment, then broke into a slow grin. "You know what? After watching that woman steal your property and humiliate you in front of the whole county, I think that is exactly what you should do." We recruited 2 other neighbors who had grown tired of Corinne's authoritarian behavior. Tom Miller, who ran the local marina, had been hassled by Corinne for safety violations that existed only in her imagination. Sarah Chen, who lived 3 houses down, had been issued bogus citations for her dock decorations. Like me, they had discovered that complaining about Sheriff Corinne was pointless when she controlled the complaint process. "I can provide a boat to guide the boathouse," Tom offered, "and I have all the equipment we will need for the towing operation." "What happens when she calls for help?" Sarah asked. "She will call 911, I said, "but she will be calling from the middle of the lake, in a building that is perfectly safe and seaworthy. No laws will be broken, and no one will be in danger." We practiced the operation twice during the week, working after dark to avoid detection. The flotation system worked perfectly. The boathouse could be converted from a fixed structure to a floating one in 47 minutes. The building was stable and watertight, with enough provisions to keep someone comfortable for days if necessary. On Friday evening, I watched Corinne leave the boathouse and drive away in her patrol car. I waited an hour to make sure she was gone, then sent a text message to my team. "It is time." We worked quickly and efficiently, our movements coordinated from hours of practice. Tom positioned his boat while Bill and I activated the flotation system. Sarah kept watch from shore, ready to signal if anyone approached. The boathouse lifted smoothly from its foundation, floating free on the dark water like a house-sized boat. We attached the tow lines and began the slow journey toward the center of Pine Lake, a quarter-mile from shore. As we reached the designated position, I felt a satisfaction I had not experienced in months. Corinne had used her badge and her connections to steal my sanctuary. Now she was going to wake up tomorrow morning in the middle of the lake, with no way to get back to shore except to call for help. Sometimes justice requires creativity, and sometimes creativity requires a little marine engineering. I woke up early the next morning, my heart pounding with anticipation. From my kitchen window, I could see the boathouse floating peacefully in the center of Pine Lake, looking almost surreal in the morning mist. It appeared to be a house that had somehow decided to take a swim. At exactly 7:30, I heard the sound of a car door slamming. Corinne had arrived for her usual morning routine, completely unaware that her stolen headquarters had relocated itself overnight. I grabbed my binoculars and positioned myself at the window, trying to look casual while keeping an eye on the unfolding drama. Corinne walked down to the dock, her coffee mug in one hand and her keys in the other. She was probably planning to review her paperwork and make her daily calls to harass other property owners. When she reached the end of the dock, she stopped. Even from my house, I could see the moment of confusion as she stared at the empty water where her commandeered boathouse used to be. She walked to the edge of the dock, looking left and right like the building might have somehow moved to a different part of the shoreline. Then she spotted it. Through my binoculars, I watched her jaw drop as she realized her stolen sanctuary was floating in the middle of the lake. She pulled out her phone, probably calling the station to report that someone had stolen her stolen property. But Corinne was nothing if not persistent. She marched back to her patrol car and drove around the lake to Tom Miller's marina, where she commandeered his pontoon boat. Tom later told me she was furious, demanding that he take her out to investigate criminal activity. I watched the pontoon boat make its way across the lake, Corinne standing in the bow like a general approaching an enemy fortress. When they reached the floating boathouse, she jumped onto the small porch I had built, her uniform soaked from the spray. "This is Sheriff Martinez," I heard her voice carry across the water as she shouted into her radio. "I need backup at Pine Lake. Someone has stolen county property." The radio crackled back. "Unit 47, can you clarify the nature of the theft?" "Someone stole a building," Corinne replied. "A whole building. It is floating in the middle of the lake." There was a long pause. "Unit 47, please repeat your last transmission." "The county waterway management facility has been moved to the center of Pine Lake. It is floating. I repeat, the building is floating." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. Corinne was trying to explain to her dispatcher that someone had stolen a building and turned it into a boat, and she was doing it while standing on that same building in the middle of a lake. Tom's pontoon boat had returned to shore, leaving Corinne stranded on the floating boathouse. She was trapped in her stolen sanctuary, unable to get back to land without help, and that help was going to require her to make some very embarrassing phone calls. "This is Unit 47, she radioed again, her voice rising with frustration. "I need immediate assistance. I am stranded on county property that has been illegally relocated to the center of Pine Lake." By now, word was spreading around the lake community. Neighbors were coming out of their houses to see what was happening. Someone had set up a lawn chair on their dock and was watching the drama unfold like it was a movie. Another neighbor was recording everything with their phone. Corinne's radio crackled again. "Unit 47, are you requesting water rescue?" "I am not requesting water rescue," she shouted. "I am requesting investigation of theft and destruction of county property." "Unit 47, you stated that you are stranded on a building in the middle of a lake. That sounds like a water rescue situation to me." The comedy was beautiful. Corinne had spent weeks humiliating me, treating me like a criminal on my own property, and now she was the one calling for help from the middle of the lake. She was experiencing the helplessness and frustration she had inflicted on me, and she was doing it in front of an audience. When the county rescue boat finally arrived, Corinne was packing back and forth on the small porch, her uniform wrinkled and her authority completely deflated. The rescue team had to physically help her onto their boat while neighbors watched and took pictures. "This is not a rescue," she kept insisting as they transported her back to shore. "This is a crime scene." But from where I was sitting, it looked like justice. Poetic, creative, and completely legal justice. Corinne had wanted my boathouse so badly that she had stolen it through abuse of power. Now she could have it, right where I had always wanted it to be, somewhere she could not bother me. The boathouse looked perfectly at home floating in the center of Pine Lake, like it had been designed for exactly that purpose. Which, as it turned out, it had been. The floating boathouse incident triggered an investigation that Corinne had not expected. When the county commissioners were forced to explain why their sheriff was stranded on a stolen building in the middle of a lake, uncomfortable questions began to surface. Within days, I was contacted by Detective Linda Rodriguez from the state attorney general's office. Unlike the local officials who had been dismissing my complaints, Detective Rodriguez was genuinely interested in the facts. "We have received multiple reports about irregular property seizures in your county," she explained during our meeting. "Your situation appears to be part of a larger pattern of abuse." As it turned out, I was not Corinne's only victim. The investigation revealed that she had been using similar tactics against other lakefront property owners throughout the county. The Martinez family had been pressured into selling their dock at below market value after Corinne cited them for safety violations. The Johnsons had been forced to remove a gazebo they had built on their own property after Corinne claimed it violated waterway regulations that did not exist. She was building a real estate empire, Detective Rodriguez explained, using her badge to intimidate property owners and create legal problems that could only be solved by selling to her or her associates at reduced prices. The investigation also uncovered financial irregularities in the county waterway management program that Corinne had created. The fees she had been collecting from property owners were going into accounts that she controlled personally, not county funds. She had been using her position to run a protection racket disguised as law enforcement. Meanwhile, the floating boathouse had become a local sensation. News crews arrived to film the strange sight of a house floating in the middle of Pine Lake, and my story of creative resistance spread beyond our small community. "Local man outsmarts corrupt sheriff with floating house." Read the headline in the regional newspaper. Social media picked up the story, and suddenly I was receiving messages of support from people across the country who had their own experiences with abusive authority figures. "You did what we all wish we could do," wrote one person. "You found a way to fight back without violence, without breaking the law, and with a sense of humor." The community response was overwhelming. People who had been afraid to speak up against Corinne's abuse suddenly found their courage. A town hall meeting was organized to discuss police accountability and property rights. For the first time in years, residents felt empowered to challenge authority when that authority overstepped its bounds. "This is not about one bad sheriff," Bill Thompson said at the meeting. "This is about a system that allows abuse to continue unchecked. We need accountability measures to prevent this from happening again." The county commissioners, faced with a state investigation and angry constituents, were forced to take action. They established an independent review board for police misconduct complaints and revised the property seizure procedures that Corinne had been exploiting. As for Corinne herself, She was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. The charges against her were serious: theft of services, abuse of office, extortion, and fraud. Her law enforcement career was effectively over. "I never intended to destroy her life," I told Detective Rodriguez during one of our interviews. "I just wanted my boathouse back." "Sometimes one person's courage to stand up to abuse creates change that helps everyone," she replied. "What you did was legal, creative, and effective. You exposed corruption that might have continued for years." The investigation took months to complete, but the outcome was everything I had hoped for. Karen was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to prison time. More importantly, the systemic changes implemented by the county meant that other property owners would not have to endure what I had experienced. The floating boathouse had become more than just a symbol of resistance. It had become a catalyst for reform. 6 months after the Great Float, I finally brought my boathouse home. The legal battles were over. Karen was serving her sentence, and I had received a settlement from the county that more than covered my legal expenses and the emotional distress I had endured. The day I moved the boathouse back to its original location was a celebration for the entire lake community. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak up during Karen's reign of terror came out to help with the operation. Children played on the dock, while adults shared stories and laughed about the morning when their local sheriff had been stranded on a floating building. "I still cannot believe you actually did it," Sarah Chen said as we watched the boathouse settle back onto its foundation. "When you first told us your plan, I thought you had lost your mind." "Maybe I had," I replied, "but sometimes losing your mind is the only way to find your courage." The boathouse looked exactly the same as it had before Karen's invasion, but somehow it felt different. The space that had once been my private retreat had become something larger, a symbol of what ordinary people could accomplish when they refused to accept abuse from those in power. I kept the flotation system intact, just in case. Not because I expected to need it again, but because it reminded me that sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones that nobody sees coming. Word of the floating boathouse had spread far beyond our small lake community. I received calls from reporters, documentary filmmakers, and even a few Hollywood producers who wanted to turn the story into a movie. I declined most of these opportunities. I was not interested in fame or fortune. I just wanted my peaceful life back. But I did agree to speak at a few community events about police accountability and creative resistance. My message was simple: when systems fail to protect citizens from abuse, citizens have to find other ways to protect themselves. Violence is not the answer, but neither is passive acceptance of injustice. The key, I would tell audiences, is to stay within the law while thinking outside the box. Authority figures abuse their power because they expect people to respond in predictable ways. When you respond in ways they do not expect, you take back control of the situation. The reforms implemented in our county after Karen's conviction had a lasting impact. Property owners knew their rights and had meaningful ways to report abuse. The police department implemented new training programs and accountability measures. Most importantly, the culture of fear that Karen had created was replaced by a culture of transparency and community engagement. Detective Rodriguez, who had led the investigation, was promoted and assigned to a new task force focused on public corruption. She told me that the techniques Karen had used were not unique to our county, and the reforms we implemented were being studied by other communities facing similar problems. "Your floating boathouse became a model," she said, "not just for resistance, but for reform. You showed that one person with creativity and courage can change an entire system. As I write this, I am sitting in my boathouse, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of orange and pink. The water is calm, the air is peaceful, and my sanctuary is truly mine again. Corinne's conviction has been upheld on appeal, and she will spend the next several years in prison thinking about the consequences of abusing power. Sometimes I wonder if there had been another way to resolve the situation. Could I have fought harder through legal channels? Could community pressure have stopped Corinne without the dramatic intervention of the floating boathouse? But then I remember the feeling of hopelessness I experienced when every official door was slammed in my face. And I know that sometimes dramatic measures are necessary to break through systematic corruption. The boathouse is back where it belongs, but the lesson remains. When justice fails, creativity can succeed. When authority becomes tyranny, ordinary people must find extraordinary ways to resist. And sometimes, the best way to solve a problem is to float it to the middle of the lake and let everyone see it for what it really is.